Syed Akbaruddin joins us. He's been India's former permanent representative to the United Nations. Thank you very much, Mr. Akbaruddin. Is it fair to say that Prime Minister Modi and this Indian government would much rather have to deal with Donald Trump than Kamala Harris? And while they may never say this publicly, and serving officers will certainly not say so, this is actually the better case scenario for them?
Well, Rahul, the Indian diplomatic establishment has a history of navigating changes in administration. And this goes back to almost 20 years. And even in the last 3 years, there have been changes in administration that have been navigated successfully. And there's been a secular improvement in ties through every administration. So I wouldn't think that there was a concern in the Indian diplomatic establishment about who would be in office. Having said that, I think there are some factors which make the Trump administration perhaps more preferable to the Biden administration for the Indian diplomatic establishment. Number one, you mentioned that President Trump generally prefers a personalized form of diplomacy. And he has not made any, he's never held back saying that he has an admiration for the Indian Prime Minister Modi. He considers him a friend. He considers him to be a strong leader. And if this is the personalized form of diplomacy that the US administration in Trump too will engage in, it works well for India.
But
because
Trump is also more mercurial, more transactional, more unpredictable. So take us through what you foresee as being potential landmines that the Indian government will have to navigate through while dealing with this Trump presidency.
The potential landmines will always be there. And every time there's a change in administration, we will look at it. I remember thinking of this thing during the last change in administration. Even when Trump came, there was a certain unpredictability and uncertainty. So what could be the issues? So I would think that the US is a global power. So it engages globally and comes up with global decisions. And in an interdependent world, sometimes these global decisions can have an impact, whether intentionally or unintentionally, on many others. So if the US administration starts looking at changing certain issues, so for example, tariffs and trade globally, not only for India, but for all countries globally, it would have an impact on us. Let's also not forget that it was the Trump administration which withdrew India's GSP benefits during the last term. So the other side of this is that it's a transactional approach to diplomacy, and big countries like India have many leverages that they can transact. So I wouldn't think this as a challenge. Yes, it would be a issue of unpredictability, but it can be addressed given the leverages that both the US has with India and India has with the US. And one last point I'd like to still make is that a Trump administration or a Republican administration generally tries to look at convergence of interests than congruence of values. Now, when Eastern and Western societies interact, they're bound to have these differences in perceptions in terms of values. The Trump administration perhaps is more focused on getting a congruence of interest than values. And that, again, works well for India with its most important partner, that is the US.
And he can also potentially have a better relationship for the United States with Russia, which would make it easier for India then to navigate with China, because if Russia is not as pro-China and slightly less hostile towards the United States, that too works in India's advantage. I hope to talk about this with you in detail in the days to come as we track the global fallout of this Trump presidency. Syed Akbaruddin, thank you very much for joining us.